Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Courtauld. It's very nice to see you here today. My name is Natalia Mari. I'm a lecturer here at the Courtauld, and it gives me a great pleasure to welcome here Miroslav Halek, my colleague from the Belvedere in Vienna. And in October, I went to Vienna with my MA students, and Miroslav very kindly showed us around and gave us the amazing talk about his exhibition projects, and I think my students are still under great impression from this visit. So today we're going to hear about one of Miroslav's recent projects, which I think is much more than just an exhibition project, because it combines not just art history, but also philosophical ideas, psychological concepts, and so on and so forth. So it's, and also I think it introduces the future of the exhibitions, because we often discuss can we still, for example, justify blockbuster exhibitions? And the answer is usually no, we can't. When I first heard about Miroslav's idea of this Grow exhibition, I think it introduces the way forward, much more ecologically friendly exhibitions that can be organized pretty much in any museum, in any part of the world, and you don't need to drag lots of exhibitions across the world to be in this exhibition, because it's more about the concept that unites works from different collections. And this exhibition was first, sorry, I have Miroslav's biography here, was first opened at the Belvedere in 22-23, and then South Bohemian Gallery in 24. And Miroslav also combines this amazing tendencies in his exhibitions, as well as visual semiotics. They're combined with psychological aesthetics, visual anthropology, Byzantine image theology, and current visual studies, as well as digital humanities. Sorry, I had to read it. I couldn't quite take it all in. So it's quite sort of amazing, really, the concept of this exhibition, which, as I mentioned, is much bigger than just history of art. And I also wanted to mention his current exhibition, which I think is equally incredible, although I haven't had a chance to see it yet. It just opened in April in a museum which I can't pronounce. Museum Liaunik. Thank you. It's in Austria, and it's absolutely incredible exhibition, which is dedicated to Czechoslovak art between 1948 and 1989. And as far as I can see, it's absolutely enormous, and it's incredible building as well, incredible exhibition. So if you have a chance to travel to Austria, I really recommend it. And you're welcome to look at the catalog after the lecture. But I think I said enough, and I would love to hand it over to Miroslav. Thank you.
Dear Natalia, thank you very much for these nice words. It's an honor for me to be here in Courtauld. So Natalia, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm so in pleasure even to talk to you about this concept, because it's, as Natalia mentioned, it's not just about exhibition. It's about trees. So I don't want to put our focus on the big names in art history, but much more in the subject, in the content. And in this case, it be the content, the tree. So now I would like to start lecture. Growth as a question and a challenge. The statement about supporting growth in connection with the theme of trees and visual art corresponds to significant and far-reaching changes in the relationship between humans and nature. From the first cave paintings depicting fauna and flora that no longer exist, to the contemporary artistic treatment of environmental motifs, We are accompanied by questions about the origin of what we call nature and existence, but also by concerns about the sustainability of life as we know it. We respond to these questions and concerns by inventing stories, fairy tales, legends, and myths, and by drawing inspiration from the functioning of plants and animals. The tree is one of the most frequent artistic and sacred motifs. It is a stimulating object of our imagination and an irreplaceable source of substance and material, which is why it is the focus of attention across cultures. It is striking how disproportionately little attention has been paid to this one of the most popular motifs in art history, in exhibitions and research. Despite this topic's enormous relevance, given our planet's deteriorating climate, trees are still seen as formal components of works of art. They gain institutional significance mainly when adopted by an important artistic figure in a leading artistic movement, style, or trend. In practice, art history and exhibition design use the tree as an object which, thanks to certain stylistic characteristics and differences, separates on style, genre, or ism from another. Focusing on current aesthetics and fashions when discussing such a serious and timeless topic is short-sighted and counterproductive, as it distracts attention from the main issue, the decentralization and non-linearity of the tree image through history. This means that the motif of the tree cannot be viewed from a single perspective. The tree does not serve the same purposes in the terms of civilization and evolution, has developed in parallel on multiple formal and content-related levels over the history of visual communication, and remains consistently important in the economy because of its material qualities. I often say and emphasize at this point that the tree cannot be appropriated by French Impressionists, Dutch landscape painters, Piet Mondrian, or Joseph Beuys. It will be much easier to list the names of artists in art history whose portfolios do not contain a single tree than those who have dealt with these trees either explicitly or even just by chance. Therefore, it's important to change our perspective and not view it as something made famous by a particular work of art, but rather as a constant source of inspiration that has initiated profound changes in art across epochs and cultural regions. However, trees are so omnipresent in our lives that it seems impossible to analyze their role in culture. And yet, it is necessary to address these challenges posed by major issue, or what I call cultural anthropological constants. Unlike other motifs, trees reflect the diversity of sociological, spiritual, economic, and aesthetic problems, preferences, and trends so intensely that it's important to examine the sign more closely and intensively from the perspective of visual studies or image anthropology. Only then we can avoid falling into the traps created by the ill-considered use and misunderstanding of such information. Firstly, because of the inflationary mediatization of all kinds of content, we have become desensitized aesthetically even to topics such as trees. Secondly, the constant use of these signs in visual communications leads to an unstoppable shift in the original meaning of the information, making it impossible to decode the denotative level of the tree signs. And thirdly, many messages communicated with and in the tree signs are so urgent that we cannot ignore their content. On the way to demonstrate the scope and importance of this fundamental theme in visual communication, and more specifically in art, is to highlight the shared characteristics of various approaches to this monumental natural entity. Trees play the following roles as a compositional centerpiece in the vast array of artifacts and works of art. First, mediator between the supernatural sphere and the real world. Second, inspiring form. Thirdly, an integral part of nature that carries our desires, expectations, and hopes. Whether as mythical medium, a beautiful formation, a prototype diagram, or an appeal for environmental protection, the tree is a witness to both civilizational progress and human decline. In this context, letting it grow means giving space to the inspirational power of the tree and reflecting on its significance for our society. After developing the theory for typologizing trees in visual communication, the decision was quickly made to present this topic in an exhibition. At the end of 2022, the Austrian Belvedere Gallery in Vienna prepared an exhibition project entitled Grow, which aimed to outline the possibilities of a modal approach to different types of tree representations. The exhibition in the Belvedere was divided into 3 chapters according to the 3 models. Every single chapter was distinguished by color, using shades that correspond to the colors of the tree. In the first chapter, brown was used for the walls as brown for the bark and the roots. In the second chapter, the wall color was green for the leaves. In the third chapter, the wall color was red for the fruits. It was also a great challenge not only to present the theory of typology in the exhibition using selected examples from the art history, but also to incorporate the theme of ecology, for which the trees is representative. On the one hand, we tried to rethink the usual exhibition trends by focusing on works that were not far from Vienna. That theme allows this because trees can be found in every cultural locality in many different forms. Transport was therefore reduced and greater emphasis was placed on the Belvedere's own collection. In addition, a lot of plastic waste is to be expected in any exhibition, which we also tried to reduce. Instead of printed letters on plastic layer, we switched to printing all exhibition texts on a sheet paper. After the exhibition, the artists were able to take the labels with them and plant them, because these cards are not only completely biodegradable, but also contain active plant seeds, so that something can grow afterwards. These are all small steps that, in light of this important ecological issue, encourage us to consider sustainability strategies in museum practice as well. I have for you, you can give it even this seats. There was in the exhibition. We have designed the publication accompanying the exhibition not only as a catalogue of the works, but also as a platform for explaining the theory and subsequently as an anthropology of different media perspectives of the theme of trees. I asked as experts from various academic disciplines to provide a brief digression on the theme of trees. In addition to my own study, we were able to collect contribution on the theme of trees in art history, trees in philosophy, trees in literature, trees in film and audiovisual culture, trees from a bioethical perspective, and trees in music. In the latter case, thanks to a productive collaboration with the music publisher Helvetia, which focuses on jazz, classical music, contemporary music, and peripheral genres, we were able to create a sampler from the publisher's portfolio, especially for the exhibition, and offer it in the form of a CD. For each subchapter in the exhibition halls, a composition was devised that presented the most diverse ways of dealing with nature motifs in music. And yes, the title is a paraphrase of Mussorgsky's pictures at the exhibition. We turned it around and made it music and at an exhibition. And that's the catalog. I can also give it to take a look. In addition, we used the quality of the trees to call up the individual songs from the sampler in the exhibition. Using the Smartify app, visitors could scan the tree photographs. It was for each subchapter and each hall was another photograph of the tree. So the visitors can scan the tree photographs and listen to the music specially selected for each room in the best quality on their smartphones. The idea of scanning the photos instead of QR code is also related to the tree models. Trees are such unique structures that their shape can be used instead of a QR code, or rather, these codes in the digital media world are all inspired by nature. Immediately after the exhibition, interest was expressed in repeating the project at the Alšova Jihočeská galerie in Hluboká nad Vltavou near Budweis. This gallery in South Bohemia is one of the largest in the Czech Republic and features an extensive collection of Czech art from the Middle Ages and the 20th century. After the exhibition in Belvedere focused on the immediate region, it was a logical next step to include the neighboring Czech cultural landscape in the project. Even then, it was clear that the nature of the theme necessarily led to its expansion, completion, and simply to its growth. The ambition of Let It Grow Again project was also not in the classical sense to offer an overview of the most important works depicting trees. Firstly, this will be impossible given the frequency of this motif throughout the history, and secondly, it would not be of any benefit as it would merely be a collection of similar compositions without any deeper ideological context. The aim is to draw attention to the fact that trees have been used programmatically in art, always in dependence on cultural and social needs, and on the specific modal framework in which this natural object is visually communicated. In this case, too, the three chapters were adapted to the spatial layout of the gallery, with a different model being presented in each of the three wings of the gallery building. As we will see in the following analysis of the three signs, another current issue is the mishandling and instrumentalization of such active signs by visual propaganda. A framework had to be found for this in the exhibition. As in Belvedere, the works of artists who collaborated with the National Socialist regime were installed on the floor, also in the South Bohemian Gallery, and accompanied by detailed texts to explain the context and through the different hanging to acknowledge the disturbing aspect of these works in an installation. We will come back to this point later. Due to the special characteristics of the South Bohemian Gallery, the exhibition was not divided into chapters of different colors. The chapters were distinguished from each other in more detail with explanation information printed on the wall with the architectural elements. The South Bohemian Gallery has a monumental riding hall which I filled with two site-specific installations. The work of Elizabeth von Samsonov manifested an artistic passion for trees in the Linden Grove installation. 10 solitary sculptures gathered in 4 small groups evoke the art historical image type of Sacra Conversazione, sacred conversation, but instead of the Madonna and Child with Saints, the trees invite the viewer into a profound fairy tale-like dialogue. These 3 creatures are accompanied by fluttering earth souls and extended vertically by ephemeral clouds. These are the clouds, that are the earth souls. This dialogue-based work interviews the human and plant levels, the process of the emergence of a hybrid plant being so-called transplant, a memorial to the shared kinship of humans and plants. The work of Johann Feilacher, on the other hand, is a structural counterpart to this metaphysical work by Samsonov. It's called a capriole, and that means not just a leap of horse, but it can also be a leap of joy. When an indoor installation reached almost the ceiling of a 23-meter-high former riding hall, it has the effect of an artistic leap. 64 logs made of thin spruce wood, 5 and 6.5 meters long, playfully reach an impressive height and are reminiscent of a gigantic game of Mikado. This constructive interplay of shapes celebrates the trees as an irreplaceable architectural element which with extraordinary material and aesthetic qualities. Sustainable building can be spectacular. While the publication on the first Vienna section focused on trees in various art forms from the history of fine art and literature to music and film, the book Let It Grow Again draws attention to the diversity of methodological approaches to this topic within the discipline of art history and art theory. My own study, which defines trees' model of tree representation in art history based on approach from visual anthropology and visual semiotics terminology, is supplemented by 8 studies from methodological different perspectives on the same motive. Knowledge of the principles of analyzing the individual components on the work as a whole is like a set of keys with which we can unlock even the ostensibly oblique layers of enigmatic paintings, sculptures, installation, etc. The qualitative and quantitative properties of a tree predestine it to be viewed from widely divergent positions. Case studies provide insight into the interpretative tools available on the parameters of the work that are focused on by methods of iconography, iconology, psychoanalysis, phenomenology, analytical philosophy, structuralism and post-structuralism, deconstructionism, environmental aesthetics, and ecofeminism. That's also the big book. But let us turn to the main topic of this lecture, namely the actual theory of tree representation models in visual communication. In our art history practice, we are often confronted with different works that contempt their temporal, stylistic, medial, and contextual differences communicate with the same signs. Given the plenty of variable tree representations, we must ask ourselves some fundamental questions in order to clarify the problem and develop our hypothesis. Does the tree play a prominent role in cultural history? Why do we look for human inscription in trees? Is our tendency to discover something more in ordinary natural object just about think in analogies, or does the motivation to personify trees have deeper roots? Nature is an ideal projection surface. Thanks to our ability to transfer our own contents into non-human objects, we are able to transform the world around us with our imagination. In this process of filling the world with human contents, the tree occupies a special, even exceptional position. In the history of thought, we have often witnessed how the tree assumes the function of a dialogical partner through which we can better understand ourselves. A case in point is the excerpt by the philosopher and theologian Martin Buber from his 1923 essay I and Thou, in which the tree serves to describe human self-perception and self-awareness by subjectifying the reality in question. The tree is similar to us in its morphology, and in some ways we are able to relate to it more easily and de facto elevate the objective level of this natural form to a more personal and individual level. But can everyone recognize or even find a dialogical partner in a tree? What if my attitude towards nature and trees is fundamentally pragmatic and emotionless? And can this almost esoteric dimension of the understanding of nature be accepted as decisive for defining the human-tree relationship? The tree in art has fulfilled specific purposes throughout history, and its categorization is far from limited to a statement of aesthetic, iconographic, or practical function. This means that the tree in art is not reducible to a beautiful part of nature, to an exclusive attribute of a limited number of religious and another mythical motifs, or to a material component of material culture from prehistory to the present. From antiquity to contemporary art, the forms and contents, functions and roles, values and meanings of trees are modified or updated in the respective context of the time, but at the same time they remain surprisingly constant. It has already been mentioned that nature, and especially trees, are the ideal and most common non-subjective projective surface of man. It is in works of art that the extent to which man identifies with the shape of nature and becomes its face, it's demonstrable. This distinction is not trivial, because in the first case it is a search for analogies between the forms and manifestation of man in nature, which we call anthropomorphism. In the second case, when everything objective is transformed according to the subject, and thus all objective realities subordinated to the will of the subject, then we speak of anthropocentrism. First, of course, we read the sign of the tree thanks to its generally intelligible likeness to the trees, as we know them in the nature, that is, thanks to its qualitative and quantitative analogy with the concrete trees of our memories. At the same time, however, we recall the trees in our memories with a number of personal, external, and otherwise conditional content impositions. In both cases, art gives us ideal examples of how we use plants to express spiritual ideas, but on the other hand also how the world around us inspires us to define the categories of the sublime and the beautiful. The contrast between the supernatural and the real, between subject and object, between inner experience and the external world, between fantasy and reality seems to be implanted in the artistically represented tree beforehand. If the sign of an impressionistic image of an autumnal avenue lined with colorful trees evokes a lethargic mood, an inner reflection during the slow onset of winter, when scenes like this transport deep emotion expressed with sublime comparisons such as the infinite ocean, as so impressively described by the French historian Alexis de Tocqueville, then it is clear that this visual code has reinterpreted and exposed to us more than just a common, anonymous, natural scene. Pictorial semiotics of Charles Sanders Peirce is a citable method to analyze visual communication whose basic units are signs with an excess of content references and an richness of formal specifics. The tension between the formal and content parameters of the image, sign, tree results in models in which the latter is read predominantly and dominantly as, firstly, as a symbol of the supernatural, secondly, or as formal inspiration. This hypothesis takes into account the historical development of the tree motif in art, as well as the emergence of always new variants of its representation, because only in this way is it possible to offer a more comprehensive theory of the model functioning of the tree in art history. The model in which the tree refers to supernatural contents and the model based on the formal criteria of the tree cannot be strictly separated from each other. It follows that in some cases there must necessarily be a model diffusion, that is, a hybrid model. In such cases, the natural functionality, form, and other natural properties of the tree are crucial, but paradoxically lead to metaphysical associations. In the basic analysis of the pictorial material to central compositional element of which is a tree, the consistency of its coding is evident. If we decipher a tree in a representation, it means that one of the formal parameters of this future unmistakable leads us to parallels between it and a real tree. Although this similarity factor between the real object and the tree image signs is crucial in most cases, it does not mean that there is no evolution within the sign coherence. A tree in art evolves, it grows. The notion of growth implicitly encompasses the life force that the tree in particular embodies in such a fascinating way. The tree's property of changing in the dimension of time and space, unknown to us, is fascinatingly appealing. Why should this dimension be foreign to our perception of time and space? The life cycle of a tree usually exceeds our lifespan by several times, and as it grows with its habitat, it forms a static counterpart to our moving from place to place, our migration. This does not mean that the tree is immobile. Beyond the visible manifestation of bending branches and dropping leaves or fruit, the tree is an organism of constant activity, but observing the growth of plants exceeds our cognitive abilities, is hidden to our senses, or is not grasped by them. The word growth is also associated with the expectation of increased continuation of an activity already begun. The course of this process in nature is not linear, which means that it is impossible to predict and pre-program the exact annual increase in height and volume of the tree. Perhaps this is why the tree is so analogous to the picture of the evolution of human culture. Instead of straight, direct and regular path, evolution eventually tries forks, branches and knots, as Charles Darwin outlined as early as 1837 in his famous Notebook B. The morphological characteristics of plants, their impressive physiology, but also their pictorial poetics inspire and fertilize scientific terminology in all disciplines. In medicine, for example, we encounter the term arbor vitae, tree of life, naming the branched tree-like crown pattern that can be recognized on a vertical section through the cerebellum or the so-called dendritic cell of the immune system, deriving its name from the ancient Greek word dendron, tree. We link not only the organic parts of our biological body to the structure of the tree, but also our functioning in society within the social body. Family tree diagrams are used in genealogy to visualize the widely branching social connections within specific social groups. That such diagrams have an important place even in the myth-religious truth is evidenced by the biblical motif of the Jesse tree. This iconographic motif is linked to the Old Testament book of the prophet Isaiah. The lineage of the saviour is here compared to a fruit-bearing tree whose origin, the root, erit radix Jesse, goes back to Jesse, the father of Israel's King David. This genealogy of Jesus is then fictiously reconstructed in the Gospels of Luke and Matthew. The evangelists attempt to create a seamless successions from Adam in the creation story in Luke or from Abraham in Matthew to Jesus, thus legitimizing the origin of the Messiah whose coming was foretold in the Old Testament. Although the lists of names in Matthew and Luke differ, these staged genealogies become important models for medieval iconographies, but also to gain legitimacy within various hierarchies. Historically unverifiable, artificial, fabricated genealogies become a popular argument in claiming a better social status, were instrumentalized to gain privilege or served as proof of succession. The iconography of the Jesse tree is therefore very often reduced to certain attributes, as in the early 16th century engraving of the genealogy of Christ with the kings and the great-grandfather Abraham. Here we see that the choice of the root is the origin as well as the individual branches can vary, and that the structure is adapted to the respective purpose. In this case, the family tree begins with Abraham, not Adam or Jesse, and the branches are occupied exclusively by kings. Such examples, as well as Darwin's evolutionary diagram, clearly show how temporal succession can be both visualized and instrumentalized using a tree structure. In both cases, the process of growth, branching, and is the explosion of fruits, but also the establishment of roots, serves to explain important questions of origins. In Darwin's case, it is a question of the evolution of the whole species. In the iconography of the family tree, it is the confirmation of ruling dynasties. The idea of the diagram is not a passive schematization of the relational structure under study, but the ability to adapt flexibly to the specific linkage of the individual members of the system. The artistically crafted family trees branch out kinship organically with the potential for further growth, thus taking into account the possibilities of expanding the diagram to include descendants and future generations. Man selects from nature those elements that the best meet his material, communicative, and spiritual needs. The shape of a tree may inspire and motivate the projection of spiritual content, but as soon as it comes to the manufacture of dwelling or tools, even religious taboos give way to practical purpose and trees become a sacrifice to man's economic goals. No matter how intensely some cultures have worshipped the tree, wood has always been treated as an important raw material. Belief in the supernatural has not prevented people from using it as a natural resource. The worship of deities, of goddesses in the tree does not conflict with its material value. The daily use of wood, bark, resin, and other juices, seeds, pollen, flowers, stones, fruits, leaves, or needles, stems, and shoots made the tree indispensable to society and led to man's dependence on it. However, the relationship thus developed is not based on disproportionate conditioning or purely economic calculation. In works of art, the interactive coexistence is about symbiosis as an open system that can respond dynamically to any situation of civilization. Since human beginnings, the tree has been part of the psychic home of man. Otto Masal does not use the term psychic home to define a territory that can be defined by geographical coordinates. He is concerned with contingency, with the possibility of locating or rather domesticating a whole range of individual but also intimate ideas. We project these ideas onto the trees because its morphological quality in many ways evokes the human being. Far deeper analogies between man and tree than mere anatomical resemblances are indicative. The often mentioned growth as a manifestation of the dynamic force of development is also the ultimate agent of man's identification with the primordial life energy of flora. The vital manifestations of plants such as the uptake of nutrients by their roots, the respiration of their leaves, the flow of juices in their organelles, and the fructification of their fruits have animated and continue to animate the anthropomorphization of nature. The cult of the tree, there's two basic starting points, firstly material and secondly metaphysical. The first starting point has become a necessity bordering on economic dependence, which has resulted in the prominent positioning of the tree within the hierarchy of socially useful raw materials. The second premise is conditioned by the first, since it is the tree's importance to humans that has sparked an interest in seeking its sense in the supernatural capacities and connections in its immediate environment. While the sign of the tree does convey universal content and it's accessible to most recipients depending on the particular convention, there are fundamental shifts in its deeper meaning across cultures. Take the examples of the tree of Eden from the Judeo-Christian tradition in the scene from Genesis that initiates a whole series of mythologies. We learn no generic specifics about trees. Identification is reduced to a description of gustatory and aesthetic qualities. The anonymous trees of knowledge from the biblical story of the creation of the world is identified differently depending on the region. It is particularly form is globalized and fixed only in the course of history. In Europe, this tree is most often identified with the apple tree. It was not until the Middle Ages that the image of the fruit tree with the fateful apple became established and assumed a dominant attributive position in the iconography of Adam and Eve. References to the apple tree are linked either to the Latin wording lignum pomiferum from the first chapter of Genesis, or to its later over-interpretative identification directly with the tree of knowledge of good and evil, lignum sapientiae boni et mali. One of the earliest non-biblical texts identifying the forbidden tree of the Garden of Eden with the apple tree is the metrical epic Heptateuchos by the Gaulish poet Cyprian from the early 5th century. Other mythological references from ancient tradition, such as the golden apples from the Garden of the Hesperides, to which Hans Martin von Erfa refers in his iconology of the Book of Genesis, are also condensed in the apple tree. In even older Jewish sources of rabbinic tradition and the Apocrypha, the fig tree is identified with the tree of knowledge. But in exegesis we even find the vine or the olive tree. Thus, depending on the region and specific traditions, has developed which sees different fruits on the tree of Eden: the orange, the lemon, the cherry, the date, or as in Georgia and Armenia, the pomegranate. For economic, climatic, and other social reasons, therefore, different fruits as symbols can only be understood in the context of a particular region. The current communication standard is to use such symbols only for those who are familiar with the convention. This is why the apple tree, which is of such great economic importance in Central and Western Europe, is associated with the Old Testament paradise scene. Even to the fruit and the tree themselves have nothing to do with the story. In a region with a different tradition, this connection does not automatically work, just as the idea of a serpent offering Eve a date or a cherry is peculiar in the Central European context. Apparently, with the exception of cultures that have evolved in areas with little or no tree vegetation, such as steppes, tundra, or deserts, the tree is an important visual feature throughout the world. Tree importance in societies is continuously evolving and changing. Some layers of meaning deepen, for example, when the tree becomes an indicator of a healthy or unhealthy environment as a result of an ecological crisis, while other contents fall into oblivion. Not practicing rituals such as hammering nails into a legendary trunk in order to grant wishes results in a misunderstanding of a particular sign. Even in the 19th century, the similar custom of nailing nails into a split piece of wood is still alive, as evidenced by the so-called nail trees, on German Nagelbaum, in Vienna Stock im Eisen, or in Temesvar in Romania, Pomul Breslevor, for example. It not only takes 100 years to turn a cult object into a museum artifact and a tradition into an object of ethnographic research. We decipher an old wooden lock full of nails from our cultural experience as a work of art, rather than automatically recognizing in it a totemic artifact in whose effects we should believe implicitly. As some traditions are not practiced, festivals are not celebrated, and materials are not used, much of the knowledge associated with them is also lost, and their reconstruction is left to archaeology, ethnology, anthropology, art history, or other social science disciplines. The fact that the representation of a tree can convey complex religious ideas or fairy tales is related to the ability of humans to assign abstract content to any given sign and to collectively agree on a limited range of meanings that will be exclusively associated with a particular sign. Such a sign is called a symbol, and it's etymological based on the ancient Greek word symbolon, expressing the ancient practice of joining disparate parts into a whole. Original, it was a way of confirmation if, after breaking, for example, a seal, the validity of some information was legitimized by its joining. For there to be a reasonable and valid union of two seemingly incongruous parts, principles, phenomena, objects, substance, etc., the resulting image that is their common contribution must be recognizable. Recognition in the original interpretation of the word symbol is very apt, because in order for a symbol to be understood at all, its added value as a higher whole must be clear. An image of a plant will only be a purely natural motif if we did not recognize other content in it. The apple is a fruit that is red, green, round, flattened, shiny, dull, sweet, sour, and one could go on at great length with a similar enumeration of properties. But the apple is also culturally imbued with so many external mythical contents that make it a symbol of fertility, immortality, eternal youth, sensuality, pleasure, delight, knowledge, peace, victory, the whole world, but also of strife, sin, and death. However, the symbol of the apple is still progressing. As it is one of the most frequented fruit crops, its spectrum of meanings is enriched in aqueous, other highly topical connotation, as the case of the logo of the technology giant. By the year 2024, the simple silhouette of a bitten apple will likely be more commonly associated with the technology company than with the biblical story of Adam and Eve. In less than half a century, this company has overlaid a new layer of content on top of the biblical apple symbol, which has existed for nearly 1,000 years. This example demonstrates how arbitrariness works in practice, showing how shifting modes signify not only the interpretation but also the creation of symbols, the symbol of the tree being a prime example. The exclusively understanding of the meanings of a symbol is the prerogative of the kind of communication that the eminent Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure subjected to the principle of arbitrariness. It is a notion explaining how a sign can unmotivatedly, without a causal or other real connection with specific object, design them or convey their other abstract contents. The apple has no inherent meaning relating to immortality or knowledge. For this meaning to be conveyed by the apple, there must be a social agreement that this particular decoding is correct. The tendency to explain unexplained phenomena in the nature through functional association has led to the creation of symbols as proxies for all that is unexplained. Functional association means that in order to effectively convey the transcendent human transcending divine information and adequate object capable of conveying it is so. Amulets, talismans, and totems of various materials carry a trace of the supernatural, either because of exceptional materiality, supernatural size, or fabricated fictitious origin. In addition to their economic benefits, plant has high cult value due to the medicinal properties. The magical connection between the desired effect of medicine and the miraculous power of the plant has been nurtured and activated for generations. In many archaic culture, it is charged with supernatural content, occupying the function of a mythical prototype, from which the other narrative lineages with miraculous and supernatural content derived. Interestingly, however, the tree itself rarely occupies the role of a divine entity. In various mythologies, it is an instrument, an incarnation, or a residence of divine or demonic forces. It itself mediates these realms, but is not an equal part of them. An exception might be the three goddesses of ancient Egypt, who were believed to grant fruit and shade of the needy and were therefore communicate as symbols of fertility. The ancient peoples of the Orient worshipped the tree of life in many forms, as the plane tree, date palm, coconut, cotton, or olive tree, ash, lime, fir, or oak, depending on the geographical location. Over time, each of these extraordinary trees has taken in cosmic proportions and has become a world tree, Weltenbaum, Yggdrasil, or the centerpiece of a sacred space, such as Irminsul, Barnstoker, Glacier, and others. In the pantheon of the Germanic mythology of the Norse sagas, trees are often the supporting force ensuring the integrity of the physical world by holding the earth with their roots or carrying it in their crowns. With each content we add to the tree through art, it figuratively adds a new year circle as a testimony to the intellectual history of humanity. Layer by layer, new meanings are attributed to old motifs. Depending on which messages appear to be important in a particular time and culture, all the layers are overlaid with other, more current, more precise ones. Contradictory meanings are also layered in the symbol of the tree. The positive can be overlaid with the negative. The branches reaching towards the sky and the roots extending into the depth of the earth stimulate the imagination and are the cause of the aforementioned ambivalence. Roots can evoke either stability or decay. Blossoming and green branches signify life and sexual power, whereas dry branches are more often associated with destruction and bareness. In the mighty tree, we witness divine forces, while in its dark and mysterious counterpart, we see demonic ones. Trees in art to symbolize life, like lignum vitae, arbor aeternitalis, arbor bona, arbor victoriosa, arbor divinalis, arbor celestialis, but also death, like lignum sapientiae boni et mali, arbor mortalis, arbor bis mortua, arbor mala, arbor crucis, arbor infructuosa. which is evidenced not only by their artistic but also by their devotional variation. Polarizing symbols serve the artwork to achieve specific atmospheres of tension. In Giovanni Segantini's painting Evil Mothers, the figure of the nursing mother, itself a symbol of referring to life and protection, is fatalistically integrated into the icy coldness of the landscape and the inanimated fragility of the warped tree. Inspired by Luigi Illica's 1889 translation of a 12th century Buddhist legend entitled Nirvana, Segantini expressed his inner connection with nature in this painting full of exposed patience. The depiction of the tree, which raises metaphysical questions of the afterlife, theodicy, and the connection of our consciousness with nature, is not dependent on the identification of particular plant in the forest. This tree need not actually exist or have specific botanical tendencies to propagate the myth of a cosmic tree carrying our world. That is, the symbol of the tree functions as a medium of abstracted content, regardless of the nature of object that its shape refers, since the tree of knowledge in Genesis, for example, is referenced not by an apple tree somewhere behind the house, but by a fatal violation of a divine command. In the Norse sagas or in Asians' legendary trees, we find direct species names, but their morphology is so hyperbolized that their real existence is irrelevant for the purposes of story, spirituality, or ritual. These are mediums of spiritual content, in the form of trees assuming human characteristics, tree as attributes identifying persons or events, as well as trees directly and indirectly representing higher transcendent entities. Bending these symbols to natural object allows for imaginative completion and ultimately reconfigures the story as a whole. A prime example in the biblical tree of knowledge and the tree of eternal life. Civilizational, the shape of the tree not only projects external content, it also absorbs and preserves similar content in cultural memory. Therefore, the symbols can always be realized because even archaic motifs are appropriated and contextualized in art according to the relevant social conditions. We decipher the image of the tree not immediately as a symbol of the spiritual realms. For that we must first identify it as such at all. In this identification takes place on a different sign level. In order to be able to decipher a symbol, we must be able to read it. In the case of the tree image, this is the trivial sounding principle of likeness. Symbolic interpretation are often unfamiliar, so when reading such signs we orient ourselves according to their similarity to real objects, in our case the visible properties of a plant. Characters which are similar in a particular parameter to the objects they are referred to are called icons. In the image of a tree, I preserve primarily the tree itself as a natural object, due to its trunk, branches, twigs, leaves, fruit, and bark. Seeing the tree as a medium of a higher power is not the only motivation for capturing it visually. In the Western European cultural tradition, the Renaissance replaced the golden background of medieval figures of saints with a view of the landscape, opening up new possibilities for art depicting the world. Finally, landscape painting as this artistic genre has established itself in European art since the 16th century, is based on empirical cognition and illustrative meditation of unique moments in nature, even when the landscape is mythical, idealized, or charged with emotion. As with the works of Romanticism, behind the hyperbolized or symbolic nature motifs are personal and sensory stimulating experiences with specific elements. The experience of a windstorm, deafening thunderclap, a daunting storm, a blinding midday sun were and are important factors in artistic representation of nature. After all, even the aversion to these idealistic aesthetic tendencies led to the visual articulation of the rational beauty of trees, from Biedermeier to realism, impressionism, post-impressionism, cubism, constructivism, the so-called Formkunst, to abstract tendencies. The process of capturing and compressing empirical experience into a visual sign is in the case of the icon reliant on analogies. There simply has to be some clue at which we can establish similarity between the represented and the depicted. This may be color, size, shape, or some other property in which the sign icon and its object are similar. In many works of art we see that similarities, or more precisely analogies, between nature and man are the main cause of what we call anthropomorphism. The shape of a tree encourages us to draw parallels between human limbs and branches and roots, between body and trunk, and between head and crown, and so on. The intermingling of these forms creates fantastic hybrid creatures. At other times, trees act as personified narrators or take on the main roles of protagonists in stories. In archaic cultures, trees are not only encountered as messengers of supernatural power, but through morphological analogies with humans, they also become inspiring dialogue partners. Anthropomorphism has symbolic qualities, for in the form of a tree, for example, the contents of a human being are related, or conversely, in the image of a human being, the contents of a plant. However, the very process of this uncovering or denotation is of an iconic nature. The semiosis here is based on qualitative or quantitative analogy. The inspiration from nature is based on pragmatism in the sense of that humans derive useful causalities, structures and systems from fauna and flora. From the rules of statics and constructions in architecture, from various non-verbal forms of communication, network communication, signals, impulses, etc., to social phenomena such as hierarchies, to elementary binary contention, the sexual function of plants, to complex multi-level walls, the vertical and horizontal layering of a forest habitat, we draw constant inspiration from all of these. The historical level of our knowledge is understood as something configurable, something we are in position to represent as a relational connection of data and facts. The so-called arboricultural scheme, which has conducted our diagrammatic representation of the interrelationship of different phenomena since the Porphyrian tree at the latest, is ideally suited for these purposes. Around 2040, the medieval logician Petrus Hispanus proposed an illustrative model of the history of knowledge, branching out into several directions and levels in order to clarify the classification system of the Neoplatonist Porphyry. The French philosopher René Descartes also used the tree analogy in his 1637 treatise on the method of right thinking and the search for truth in the science. Behind how we summarize our knowledge and how we design tables and diagrams is often a working prototype in nature. The principles of rooting, knotting, branching, and networking influence our taxonomic thinking.
the way we navigate the labyrinths of various indexes, lists, archives, and encyclopedias. The fact that the different classifications and orders have their own aesthetics has to do with the fact that we separate from complex natural forms only the qualities that are appropriate to our needs and elevate them to the norms of visual communication. The constructive quality of horizontals, verticals, and diagonals in a tree fascinated so much that it has led to the visual revolution of modernism. Impressed by the clarity of the tree's lines, Piet Mondrian reduced his means of painterly expressions to a stage of abstract liberation from the reality of the subject between 1911 and 1940. Those on the way to abstract art, paradoxically, the tree also inspired him to distance himself from natural forms. Sterile and rigid geometry is in this style suprematism or constructivism may not exist in the natural environment, but it is the isolation of, for example, the linear contours of the trunks in a forest or the dense network of branches in the shelter that has had a lasting influence on generation of abstract, structuralist, post-structuralist, and deconstructivist artists. Structural principles derived from the tree are continuously developed in architecture, music, visual art, design, literature, theater, dance, film, NFTs, etc. In addition to its symbolic meaning and deep roots in the mythic consciousness of different cultures, the tree fascinates and inspires on a rational empirical level. Its shape, resilience, adaptability, longevity, color, flexibility, orderliness, and so on. Metaphorically speaking, in art, a tree does not only mean knowledge, sapientia, which was to be the fatal fate of Adam and Eve in paradise, but also useful guidance, scientia. It is the specific morphology of the tree, the arrangement of its various parts from root to fruit, that seems particularly appropriate to illustrate our thinking about systems and hierarchies, abstract ideas, and barely comprehensible processes. The tree as a symbol, but also as an icon, a sign based on similarity, is transhistorical. The development of natural mythologies is directly proportional to the growth of the practical value of natural resources for humans. A certain tendency in the preferences of the chosen communicative framework is traceable, whether, for example, in the late 19th century, for a romantic idealistic view of the landscape defined by symbols is not preferred, or whether the avant-garde is not dominated by a rather positivistic formalistic approach to the substantive qualities of trees. This too is conditioned only by a narrow geocultural sphere. In other regions, any generalization may no longer be valid. Therefore, it is necessary to determine the models of symbolic or iconic communication with trees always individually and depending on synchronic, temporally, but also geographically corresponding contexts. But can trees still serve as a model if today's systems are built and multi-layered structures? Can a tree still be an inspiration of virtual environments work on the principles of neuronal networks and neuroplasticity? According to rhizome theory, the internal order of trees lacks the non-linear multidimensional connections and decentralized distribution of competitions that is necessary to a model grasp of the functioning of the postmodern world. On the one hand, Deleuze and Guattari's enthusiasm for transversal, always reconstituable connections, interconnections, and renetworks within fluid systems is appropriate to describe complex operations and phenomena. On the other hand, the reduction of the tree to a centrist and strictly hierarchical organism of reality does not fit. After all, even they themselves alibistically admit that the tree and the root structure can be contained in the rhizome. And that same time branches and roots can function rhizomatically. Just on the basis of the variation of the tree signs and the systemic openness mentioned so far, it is obvious that the tree as such fulfills the most demanding criteria of being a model transcending rigid orders, prejudice, formular and limited functions. The prematerial harsh post-structuralist critic of the root or the entire tree structure, the tree signs remains an indispensable part of visual communication. In the 1970s, at the time when Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari were complaining about the limitation of the tree model, the art of the neo-avant-garde demonstrates its timeless efficiency in conveying social, political, and ecological themes. In various artistic concepts, actions, and installations, the trees is still an effective means of drawing attention to the pressing problems of society. But are the only two approaches to the sign grasp of the tree in art mentioned so far at play? Are trees, for example, communicated in the performances of artists of the second half of the 20th century only as multiple meaning symbols or as resemblances to real object, as icons? The answer to this question is the third model of the functioning of the tree in the history of art. It would be contrary to the basic principles of semiotics if we insisted on the rigorous separation of the two signs and the impossibility of taking over the functions of one sign modeled by the other. In a certain group of signs, there is also a hybrid merging of several models into one, in that a sign based, for example, on likeness, in addition to a particular object, also refers to another, parallel functioning content. In this situation we speak of supersign. It is a communicative unit whose task is to distribute qualitatively different but in some semantic parameter corresponding contents on several levels. Thanks to its easy decipherability, the tree is an ideal sign of specific natural object and at the same time a medium for political, social, religious and ecological messages. It can communicate both stories and facts. It reflects the form of man and his inner life, his wishes, dreams and motivations. The combination of both models into a new image of the tree in which the symbolic but also the formally analogical is decisive has become significant for a specific field, namely ecology. The air purifying function of plants has made these massive trees the heroes of our time, the personified saviors. The slogans of saving the environment by preventing deforestation and planting trees have become the modern myth of salvation. Because of the urgency of the ecological crisis, the tree has fallen out of the modern soteriological concept. At the same time, however, the functional and formal relationship of the tree sign to its natural biochemical properties is conveyed at this distinct symbolic level. In art with an environmental message, the tree is not seen from a single perspective, that is not only as a medium of the supernatural or as a dialogue partner similar to us in anthropomorphic situation. Sprouts, branches, knots, tubers, but also breaks and deformation are transformed in art into biomorphic texts, telling an age of destructive overproduction and egocentric recklessness about the disappointments and hopes, despairs and aspiration of an entire civilization. In the end, then the icons of the tree receive acute messages about the state of society and become a super sign referring not only to life but to survive in general. In these coordinates, the tree is a testimony to human survival in a collapsing environment. Across cultural eras and regions, the tree has remained a communicative constant. In art, our closeness to the tree is not reduced to the search for trivial analogies of head to crown, hand to branches, trunk to trunk, and feet to roots, but by continually gaining new insights from its structural logic and functionality. It remains a fascination even for societies in an industrial, technologically advanced phase of development. We benefit from a deep analysis of these monumental organisms because of our ability to abstract necessary connections from the whole and to derive pragmatic solutions to everyday needs from reductions such as the elementary directionality of lines and the structure of rooting and branching. By categorizing the richness of tree images, it becomes possible to explain their specific contextual ensuring, thus avoiding misunderstandings and false comparisons that lead to misinterpretation of their messages. These, in the following pages, deal with the problem of the mistreatment and instrumentalization of such universal symbols as trees. All of these images are from the Ribbentrop collection. Under National Socialism, the phenomenon of the forest underwent extreme ideologization. The German forest as homeland became a Germanic source of strength, and Germans became a forest people, whose qualities resembled those of strong trees. In 1920, Max Zepper completed this view of pine trees at the edge of the forest. Zepper's painting fits into the prevailing artistic doctrine of Nazi cultural policy, and so he was represented at the 1937 Great German Art Exhibition in Munich with this and 7 other tree and forest paintings. This stage cannot be ignored, which is why we are looking for museum strategies to present it. An important approach is to contextualize the symbols in such messages from a different perspective. That is why we choose quotes from victims of Nazi persecution, Brecht and Celan, whose poems have great power in relation to trees and totality. Another idea was to place the works in intentionally different whereabouts. The installation creates a hierarchy among the works by denying these collaborative pieces their actual status as painting on the wall and instead leaving them in an intermediate position which raises questions. It is finished? Is something missing? Is it supposed to be like this? And open questions are exactly what remain when dealing with contaminated art. Let's go back to Martin Buber's tree. In his most famous work, Ich und Du, the three models of artistic representation of the tree proposed here as symbol, as similarities, icons, or super signs, can be described as follows. The tree as a medium of a higher power, it's model 1, or as a functioning structure, model 2, will be an expression of the self-one relationship. Through this relationship with the object of our interest, the world as experience unfolds for us with all its myths as well as its physical contingencies. The third model of this typology would be Martin Buber's philosophy best explained in terms of I-to relationship. In this case, the relationship to nature is essential to understanding the relationship to the self. Art provides us with critical information about the state of this relationship in amazing examples. Thus, the tree conveys a higher power, a formal inspiration, a message of saving the world, or an organic connection to our environment. It is one of the most authentic signs of humanity. The Grow exhibition is not a fixed concept, nor it is a rigid arrangement of necessary works. It is about a new dynamic view. It's about placing trees at the forefront of our social interest, and by categorizing and naming them in as many cultural regions and social systems as possible, drawing attention to the importance of this cultural anthropological constant. I am gratified that after Austria and the Czech Republic, attention has been drawn to this topic in Italy, where I was invited to give a lecture. I am also very grateful to the Courtauld Institute for giving me the opportunity to present this concept here. It is hoped that it will continue to develop and that the project will continue under the motto, "Let it grow again." Thank you.